right, we're going to call this December 19 meeting of the Board of Ethical Conduct to order. Ask Ms. Waits to record roll. We've got a full board here today. First item on the agenda is approval of our minutes from the October 22nd meeting. Everyone's had an opportunity to review, I presume. Are there any comments or changes on those minutes? No changes being heard. Can someone please make a motion to approve?
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Ms. Waits, can you please read the notice of appeal rights?
Parties who disagree with a final decision of this board may appeal by filing a writ of certiorari with the Chancery Court of Davidson County within 60 days of entry of the order. Parties are encouraged to seek independent legal counsel to ensure that all deadlines and procedural requirements are properly followed.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we come to our main item on the agenda today, which is obviously Ms. Murphy's complaint. Counsel and parties are present. I see anyone that's going to be here. You all have access to the procedures for today's hearing, so I don't need to spell those out in detail. Preliminarily, we're going to have opening statements, so I wanted to get feedback from counsel or parties, whoever's going to be speaking at the beginning, on how much time you think you might need for opening statements and whether the complainant or both parties would make a closing statement at the end of the day.
7 minutes for opening, and we will be making a closing statement by Theda Murphy.
How many minutes? I'm sorry.
7 minutes.
7? Okay. Does that sound okay to you, Mr. Garrison?
Yes, I'll be
For opening? Okay, okay. And what was that?
We have some disclosures from the court.
Yes, and before we get started with the hearing itself, I believe 2 board members need to make disclosures before we proceed. So I'll open it up for those right now.
Thank you. I wanted to note for all parties that I know one of the witnesses on complainant's witness list, Dr. Seiko Franklin, who will be testifying. I know Dr. Franklin and I served together on the Tennessee Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and we've been serving together for about 2 to 3 years on that committee. I've considered the matter and am confident that it will not impact my participation in these proceedings today, but I did want to bring it to everyone's attention. Thank you.
I also need to just note that as a board member of the Equity Alliance, I have submitted nominations to the Community Oversight Board, 2 nominations. It was on behalf of the board of directors of that organization and not me personally. And so I think I could still, serve on the board as in this hearing, but open to comments about that.
I guess, is there any commentary from either of counsel related to those disclosures?
No, we would ask that all the board members introduce themselves for the record.
We'll do that, yep. Anything, Mr. Garrison, in relation to the disclosures?
Well, I would be concerned about the board member's personal relationship with one of the witnesses, given that that's a relationship that's been going on for the last 2 or 3 years, and one that will presumably continue.
Okay.
And I'd ask that the board consider recusing that board member from this hearing.
I believe that, and maybe this is a question for counsel, I believe that recusal is really at the discretion of the board member, her or himself. Do you have any commentary on that, Mr. Klein?
No, I believe that's right. The board member evaluates the conflict much like a federal judge or a judge would do. And in this case, the board member's done that, so I think it's appropriate for her to serve.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to formally call the hearing to order at this point. Per our procedures, the first item on the agenda is to solicit any preliminary motions, stipulations, or agreed orders from the parties. Is there anything that anyone would like to present in that regard?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now open it up to opening statements from each of the parties.
In keeping with the request, do we want to introduce ourselves?
Yes, that's correct. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. My name is Josiah Reed. I'm an attorney here in Nashville. I'm chairman of the board. I've been serving for approximately 18 months, I believe.
I'm Mariah Cole. I work at Meharry Medical College and have been serving on the board for about 2.5 years.
I'm Berkeley Allen. I am on the Metro Council serving as Speaker Pro Tem, which puts me on this board, and I've been serving for close to 12 months.
I think that's
I
correct.
think that's right.
Yes.
I'm Larry Patton, Senior, retired bus driver from MTA, and I've been serving on the board for about 2 years.
Diane Diani, an attorney, retired, and have been serving on the board for more than 2 years.
Keith Frazier, I'm an attorney here in town, and I've been serving on the board for, I think, 3 years.
Okay. And everyone, I think Ms. Wade's fame precedes her. And this is Kevin Klein, who's counsel to the board, outside counsel in this case because the Department of Law has recused itself. All right, with that said, I'd like to open it up to complainant's opening statement. And just so you understand, this is the microphone that really the parties will use. That will be on the entire hearing, so witnesses included.
Megan Berry has stolen from Nashville. She had kept secret a close personal relationship with a member of the police department. Ultimately, it is that relationship and the money spent in furtherance of it that led her to be left open to influence and biased her in favor of police-impacted policies during her time as mayor, and against the interests of oversight by the people she swore an oath to serve. At the conclusion of the hearing, we will be asking you to do 2 things. 1, find that Megan Berry has violated the ethical standards of conduct, and 2, recommend that she be censured by the Metropolitan Council. You're going to hear from 3 individuals to aid you in making these determinations. First, you're going to hear from Sheila Clemens-Lee, and she is the mother of Jacquees Clemens. Second, you're going to hear from Dr. Sekou Franklin. He is a member of Democracy Nashville, Democratic Communities, and the Community Oversight Now Coalition. And last, you'll hear from Theda Murphy. She is the petitioner who initiated this complaint. You have, I would characterize, both a very difficult and a very simple decisions ahead of you. I characterize them as difficult because it is weighty, it is significant to a lot of people, future and current elected officials of Nashville, but most importantly, the people of Nashville are looking to you to make a decision in this matter and are trusting you to make the right one. In that sense, your decision is a difficult one, I acknowledge. But it is also a very simple one. When you look at the actual questions you are being asked to decide, with the materials that we've submitted in advance of this hearing and the 3 people you will hear from, it will be abundantly clear that yes, Megan Berry has violated the ethical standards of conduct. And when we look to the rules, it will also make it very clear what action this board should take: censure. For example, you will not be asked to decide what happened here. Megan Berry's admissions, the subsequent news coverage, the conclusion of a criminal investigation have made her conduct very clear and not in dispute. Included in the materials we submitted is a copy of the indictment and a copy of the plea petition. One of these documents charging and the other document her confessing that between March the 1st of 2016 and January the 26th of 2018, during her time as mayor, she stole between $10,000 and $60,000 from Metropolitan government. That is a Class C felony in the state of Tennessee. There is no question that felonious criminal conduct rises to the level of violating the ethical standards of conduct. They absolutely do. The second question, you're also not really being asked to decide what to do in this matter. The Metro Code of Ordinances, I think, make that very clear. Metro Code of Ordinances, Section 2.222.040, subsection C3A, list in black and white the potential actions for this board to take. And I'm going to quote, "If after a hearing the board decides that a Metro government elected official violated the standards of conduct, then the board shall take one or more of the following actions." I'm going to repeat that last part. The board shall take one or more of the following actions. Number 1, recommend to the council that the elected official be censured. Number 2, recommend the elected official resign. Number 3, refer the matter to the District Attorney General. And number 4, refer the matter to the Director of Law to institute restitution. Actions 2, 3, and 4 of this matter have already been done. Megan Berry has resigned. She has paid restitution of $11,000, and the district attorney has charged and conditionally convicted her. Some might consider that an end to the matter. We do not. The criminal plea agreement and the process surrounding it was shrouded in secrecy. Now, some of that we acknowledge is part of the criminal process. Defendants have rights, and criminal investigations are traditionally kept secret and close to the chest to protect the integrity. But many aspects of her conviction were very upsetting. She spent not one more minute in jail than it took to be booked. She paid not 1 cent to be released, and she was out in time to do a press conference. This was a demonstration to the public that there is a system of justice reserved for publicly elected officials that are not available to the rest of us. As a consequence of Megan Berry's actions, it led to one of the most embarrassing and expensive epics in Nashville's electoral history. Special elections, litigation, and appeals led to widespread cynicism, mistrust in both the people and the processes that make up local government. The only action left remaining for this board to take, and the one that we feel is the most important in terms of promoting and rebuilding trust, transparency, and accountability in this government, is censure. According to the rules, censure only requires 4 out of the 5 voting members. We are asking that all 5 of you vote in favor of censure. Each of you represents a working organization here in Nashville, free from influence of elections and lobbying interests. Your organizations are made up of working people who are and were impacted by the former mayor's decisions. All of your members contribute to the health and welfare of this city. If, and we pray when, you determine in favor of censure, the decision will be placed with the Metropolitan Council, who represent all of the districts of this city, and we hope would listen to their constituencies. Let their voices be heard. How have they been impacted by the former mayor's decisions? How have their lives been disrupted by the misspent tax dollars? What would they like to see happen? What message do they want to send to future mayors and future elected officials? That is the simple decision ahead of you. With one unanimous decision, we are asking you to let those voices be heard. Megan Berry should be censured. Censured for her actions, for her failures, censured for the mistrust that her decisions created. Most importantly, she should be censured not as the final act in a shameful political career, but as the first step in rebuilding trust and transparency in Nashville's government.
Good morning. I'm David Garrison. I'm here as counsel on behalf of Megan Berry. I'll be brief. I'd ask this board to remind itself during the course of this hearing about what its purpose is. Its purpose is to be a forum for ordinary citizens, well-known or not well-known, to bring important questions of the conduct of elected officials before this board. Certainly, citizens are entitled to bring those concerns to law enforcement. They could bring those concerns to the Metro Council in a public hearing. They could write something in the newspaper, but this forum is unique. It allows people that know something, that have a concern about what's going on, to be brought to this board. Of course, in this case, what has been brought to this board many months ago is well known, not only to this board, but to every part of Metro government and to this city as a whole. And I'd point out that Metro Council has been well aware of the circumstances and has had the benefit of an auditor's report that made no findings of any misappropriation of spending on behalf of Megan Barry. The Metro Council had an investigatory committee formed at one point. Metro Council chose to dissolve that investigatory committee. The auditor chose to end his report and issue it with no findings. Those parts of Metro government, most importantly, that represent our elected officials, that represent every corner of this county, have chosen to move on and put this part of Nashville in the past. You can do that too. The city needs to move on, and the city has moved on. Look at the hearing room today. The city can move on. Now, again, as I said at the beginning of my statement, I think it's important the board remember you're a part of the government. You're to provide due process. Any decisions that you make today have to be based, according to the Tennessee Supreme Court, on material evidence that's before this board. I would submit to you, and I'll be talking to you again in closing arguments later this morning or later today, that the evidence that you will hear will not provide any material evidence, and certainly not any new evidence that's relevant to the issues that are before you today. So when you hear the testimony that's being offered, please ask yourself, not is what being said to you important? I'm sure it will be. Not whether the testimony before you is something that should be of public concern. I expect it will be. Ms. Murphy, the organization that she's affiliated with, she's involved, and this organization is involved in important issues that concern this community. There's no doubt about that. Those issues are being addressed by Metro Council, and the public's in a discussion about criminal justice issues. But I would challenge you to listen carefully to whether the evidence that's presented to you today has any bearing on Megan Barry's conduct, because it's your duty to act on the material evidence that's presented to you, not what you've read in the paper, not what you've heard some other part of Metro government's done. And I would suggest that after hearing that material evidence, that you should choose to vote to move on. Lastly, I would point out, Mr. Yoon said that the remedy that Ms. Murphy's going to seek from you is censure. Black Law's dictionary defines censure as an official reprimand or condemnation, harsh criticism. That's what censure is. It's not reserved for somebody who has made the difficult decision of pleading guilty to a crime. It's not rises to the level of civil action. It's reserved for the instance when the board, when the facts don't rise to those levels, but this board feels that it's appropriate for the person to still be officially reprimanded. I would submit to you that Megan Barry has been more than officially reprimanded. And I would submit to you that this board should take the action to hear everything that's presented to it today. Listen with an open mind, but allow the city to move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, counsel, for opening statements. We'll now move on to testimony and the witnesses. I understand there's 3 that are going to be brought forward. It will proceed as you would expect testimony to proceed, a direct examination followed by a cross-examination and a redirect if appropriate or desired. So I'd ask complainant to call their first witness.
Sheila Clemens Lee.
And testimony today is under oath, so Ms. Waits will swear in the witness.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and the whole truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to move my chair around so I can actually look at you and ask the questions. Would you please introduce yourself to the board?
My name is Sheila Clemens Lee. I am the mother of Jacquees Clemens.
Ms. Lee, before we get into your testimony.
Counsel, apologies to interrupt. Could you please pause? We're going to have a little bit of difficulty, I think, with that microphone. So let us address that technical difficulty quickly. Yes, thank you. Okay, and before we proceed, I'll remind the witness and counsel and the board that under our rules, you can interject questions when and if you feel it's appropriate. I understand you two are going to be sharing a microphone now, but please proceed. Thank you.
Let's start again. Will you introduce yourself to the board?
My name is Sheila Clemens Lee. I am the mother of Jacquees Clemens.
And Mrs. Lee, how long have you lived in Nashville?
Since I was 12, so a very long time.
Before we get into your testimony, will you tell me a little bit about your family?
My family is very large. I had 4 children, which included Jacquees as one of the 4. I'm married to Mark Lee. We were a loving family who spent a lot of times together. I have grandchildren.
How many grandkids do you have?
I have a total of 8 now. I had 6 at the time that Jacquees was killed.
Well, I want to turn our discussion to that. On February 10th of 2017, can you take the board what happened that day?
On February 10th, 2017, I was at work. I got the call around, I want to say about 12:50, stating that Jacquees had been shot. At that time, I didn't know who had shot him. I just knew he had been shot. As I waited for my husband to come pick me up, and after that, a mother has a connection with her child, so she knows when things have gone wrong. And as we're passing by the airport, I tell my husband that Jacquees is gone. And he was like, "You don't know that. We don't know how bad it is." And I'm like, "I'm telling you, my son is gone." We got to the hospital, and people were standing around. Family had begun to arrive. No one would tell me anything. Then a detective came in. He started asking me questions about Jacquees, because at that time, the doctor had came in and said that Jacquees was deceased. I asked if I could go and ID him, and he told me no. So then at that point, my husband and my brother Tony asked if they could go and ID him. He said no, because he had orders for us not to go and ID him because we would be tampering with evidence. And I asked him what evidence, because he's deceased. And he just kept saying that he had the orders not to let me or anyone go back there. I later learned that they had said that Jacquees had did a stop and roll. And according to the videos that I've seen, Jacquees was already parked and exiting his vehicle by the time Officer Lippert had pulled up. And the next thing I know, I see my son running. And I know a lot of people ask the question, why did he run? We would never know that answer, but I'm gonna assume that Lippert said something to my son. Because to my knowing, he's never ran from the police. I saw him get shot on the video, not once, but 3 times. The first time, when he was shot, he got up, took off running again. He was shot again. Then the next time I seen, it was like Lippert had walked over to him as he's trying to get up off the ground and shoots him again, according to the videos. And February 10th, 2017 is the day that my life and my family's life changed forever. Jacquees was a loving father, provider to 2 young boys, ages 9 and 13 at the time. He was their hero. He was the oldest of 4 children and the only son. My girls looked at him not only as a brother, but as a father figure. So at that point, they didn't know how to cope. Jacquees, you know, he took on the role as being the man of our house, because at the time, as they were growing up, it was just me and my kids. So he played a very important role in all of our lives.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry. Who was the mayor during that time?
At that time, it was Megan Berry.
And what was her reaction to the shooting death of your son?
Well, her first reaction was that it was justified. There hadn't been a complete investigation or anything. She just said it was justified. And the officer had the right to shoot him.
Do you know she had all of the facts about the investigation or when she made that statement?
She made that statement the very first day.
And who was the chief of police at that time?
Steve Anderson.
And what was his and the district attorney's roles over the next couple of weeks and months?
Oh, the weeks. DA Glenn Funk had said that he wanted an independent investigation and that he had asked MNPD to step out of the way so the TBI could do that independent investigation. But MNPD did not. They continued to investigate themselves. I know that Megan Berry, due to the papers and the news, that she had a conversation with Glenn Funk to go easy on the chief.
After Glenn Funk, the district attorney, made this request of Megan Berry, the mayor, to tell MNPD to step back, what was her response?
She just told him to take it easy on the chief. She never told them to stand down at all.
I want to talk about your personal conversations with Megan Berry. When did you all meet?
We met Monday, the week of Jacquees' services at a church. It was Megan Berry, Steve Anderson, my pastor, my attorney, Joy Kimbrough at the time, my husband, and my sister. We sat down at a table. They sat across from us, and they were just looking at us, and we were looking at them. And then finally, Joy speaks up and said, "Well, y'all are the ones who called this meeting." So at that point, Megan Berry begins to talk, and she extends her condolences and says that she knew how I felt because she too had a son. And I had to let her know she couldn't possibly know how I felt because her son at that time was still alive and mine wasn't. And then I asked Chief Anderson, who gave the order for me not to ID my son? He didn't know. And I asked him, I said, "Well, you're the chief and you don't know who gave the order." He kept saying, "Ma'am, I don't know." That was his whole answer. Every time somebody asked him something, that was his answer. He didn't know. And then at that point, I asked Megan Berry if they planned on paying for my son's burial. She said, "I didn't know, but I will get back with you." I said, "Well, I need to know something by Friday because his services was Saturday." Tuesday morning, I get a call around 7 o'clock, and it's my pastor, and he's telling me that Jacquees' services has been paid in full. He also states that if the GoFundMe hadn't have been as high as it was, they would have paid the whole thing. I met her a second time because at this time, her son was deceased. It was at a Noah's meeting. A few of us showed up. We had on black T-shirts with white letters that says, "Justice for Jacquees" and "Fire Officer Lippert." I knew that she seen us because she was out in the crowd greeting people, and she came up the aisle where we were. She was 2 pews in front of us, and then she turned around. She, at that time, I didn't know his name at the time, I just knew he was her guard, whispered something to him. He looked our way, and she proceeded to walk off. After the meeting, I went up to say something to her. Mr. Forrest, he tried to stop me from getting to her, but I got around him. And when I caught up with her, I tapped her on her shoulder, because at that time she's going the opposite direction, because she sees me coming. I tapped her on her shoulder. I asked her, "Do you know who I am?" She nodded her head and said yes, and turned around. I tapped her again and told her, "I'm trying to say something to you." And at that point, I let her know that she had my condolences because I truly knew how she felt. And then I was like, "I need you to keep Lippert off of Nashville streets." She says, "Honey, trust me, he's off the streets." And I'm like, "No, you're not understanding. I know he's off the streets right now, but it's a possibility that he could get back out there on the streets." And the only thing she said was, "Trust me, he's not on the street." The third time I met and spoke to Megan Berry was at a 92Q live broadcast. She was one of the guest panels on the show. And when it was time for the community to get up and speak, I got up and I asked her, I said, "Do you know who I am?" She said, "Yes." She said, "We've talked several times." I asked her about protocol because I had been hearing about protocol all 2017. Here it is, November. I'm like, how long is protocol? That's all y'all keep telling me is protocol, protocol. We got to follow protocol. I'm like, in less than 2 months, it'll be a year, and you still saying protocol. I said, but this is how I feel. If that had been your son on February 10th, 2017, there's not a doubt in my mind that Lippert would have been arrested, tried, and convicted and sitting in a jail somewhere. But you talk about protocol. That was my last encounter with her.
This guard that you identified whispering to her during that NOAA meeting, who was that, and what did you learn about him?
I later found out his name in January of 2018, that his name was Rob Forrest. He was the guy that she admitted to having an affair with. Throughout the course of 2017, we kept asking ourselves, what does MEPD have on her? Why doesn't she make them stop? And we couldn't figure it out until January of 2018. Then it all made sense.
What made sense?
The reason why she wouldn't tell Chief Anderson not to investigate this case, the MNPD needed to step down and let the TBI take over. And that's just my own personal belief that that's the reason why.
Did the MNPD get a search warrant to go through your son's phone?
Yes, it was months later that they got a search warrant to go through his social media and his cell phone. They didn't find anything. Whatever they was looking for, they didn't find it. Later on, a year later, I believe, Attorney Daniel Horowitz, he helped me get my son's cell phone back. I had called and called to get Jacquees's property. And they kept, Detective Satterfield, he kept telling me, asking me what property. I said, whatever belongs to Jacquees, I need it. So the cell phone belonged to Jacquees, so it should have been in the property. I went through a lot of red tape to get just his clothes and stuff. I even had to call a guy in the DA's office to get the approval for them to release it. And then that's when, I think that was in maybe September. And that's when I noticed that the cell phone wasn't there. Like I said, Daniel Horowitz, he helped me get it back. And that was the only thing that I opened of Jacquees's, because I knew that it should have been pictures, his voice, everything on the cell phone. But when I opened it up, the phone was shredded. It was just demolished, like somebody took a hammer and just beat it to death on the inside. The face was intact, the back was intact, but everything in the middle was in pieces. So that was another devastating moment for me, because that was not what I was expecting. But nonetheless, I do have it, even though I can't go through the phone or anything like that. I just put it back in the package. And it sits on my banister.
Is there any other significance to Mayor Berry's affair with Robert Forrest that you think impacted the investigation of your son's death?
I think that if he hadn't have been the person that she had the affair with, that this whole investigation would have went another different way. I feel like that if she thought that Lippert was in the right, they wouldn't have paid anything towards my son's burial. They paid $5,000, and would have been more than that, like I said, if the GoFundMe hadn't have been as high as it was. So that's basically the only thing that she, pinch of a thing that she done right, being mayor and dealing with my son.
The last thing I have for you before Mr. Garrison has the opportunity to ask you some questions, would you identify these two photographs, please?
Those are Jacquees' children. Like I said, he was their provider, their hero, and he was took from them at a critical stage in a young boy's life.
And scroll down to the second one.
That's them now.
And I will make those a late filed exhibit to this hearing.
They are what I have left of my son. They remind me of him. And I just hold on to him.
Thank you, Ms. Lee.
Mr. Garrison,
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Do any board members have questions they'd like to present?
Thank you, Ms. Lee. And I have just one quick question, just to clarify. I just want to understand, you described 3 different times that you met with or spoke with former Mayor Barry. The second time you described, I think you said you're wearing the T-shirt. Where was that?
It was at a NOAA's meeting.
A NOLA's
Mhm.
meeting? Okay. NOAA's meeting, okay. All right. And do you remember about when that was?
I don't.
Okay. I think that's all. I just wanted to understand.
Do you know who paid for the funeral, the $5,000?
I just know that I spoke to her, and she said that she would see what they could do. And at 7 o'clock, my pastor called and said that it was paid for. That's all I know. I mean, I have the paperwork at home, but I didn't know to bring it. But
That's fine, thank you.
No further questions from the board? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Counsel, you can call your next witness.
My second witness is Dr. Sekou Franklin. And Dr. Franklin, I'm going to ask you the same thing, to introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sekou Franklin. I live at 1921 11th Avenue North, Nashville, Tennessee.
Dr. Franklin, can you give the board a general overview of what it is you're going to testify to? Oh, sorry.
Raise my hand.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Dr. Franklin, will you give the board a general overview of your testimony?
Well, I'm going to talk about our meeting with Megan Berry in December of 2017, just the more pertinent points of that meeting. I'll talk about the race dialogue report, and if necessary, I can also talk about a couple things that we found in the open records request that we found accidentally in that open records request that we made January of 2017, of 2018, I'm sorry.
Then, unless you prefer otherwise, let's start with that meeting.
Okay.
When was that meeting, and who was present?
That meeting was, and I have notes, so you have to forgive me for if I don't look at you. So, that meeting was, I believe, December 21st. It was 1:30 p.m., and it was with members of, most of the people involved in that meeting were with Community Oversight Now, but there were, I think, 2 people in that meeting who were not with Oversight Now, who were community members, community activists who had been working on police reform prior to Oversight Now being formed, so we're concerned about it.
And was the former mayor present?
Yes, she was. She was present along with 2 of her staff members and also the Metro Legal Director.
What took place during this meeting?
Well, our goal in the meeting was, I think, we understood what her position was regarding the oversight board, but we wanted to talk about community oversight. We had been trying to get the meeting for roughly about 4 months, and we were finally able to get the meeting in December. Even though she had been meeting with a lot of other people in Nashville, that meeting was delayed for 4 months or so, we believe. And our approach to the meeting was, we knew that she was going to oppose community oversight board proposal that had been discussed in council in November of 2017. But we also knew that she at least publicly endorsed a community oversight board task force at the NOAA meeting. So our position was to ask her to establish a task force for oversight board.
And what was her reaction?
Well, her initial reaction when she came to the meeting was to say that she didn't support the community oversight board, but we already knew that. That wasn't really what we were pressing her. When we asked her about the task force, she didn't really commit to it. She didn't really oppose it. She just basically said, she kind of handed off things to her staff, but in a nutshell, I guess in retrospect, that was some indication that she wasn't going to put any teeth in supporting the task force that she had publicly talked about at the NOAA meeting.
What significance would the task force or impact would have had on policing in Nashville?
Well, the task force, I don't know. I mean, it was her agreement with NOAA. From our perspective, we were somewhat skeptical of it, but from our perspective, we thought it could take legislation that had been bandied about in council and it had potentially some legal questions, and that the task force could work through those issues and perhaps come up with a better legislation.
Any reason why that you could come up with, leaving that meeting, she would go for it in the NOAA meeting, but against it in private with you?
No, I mean, our issue was personally, that she was always opposed to oversight board. I mean, I've heard things privately about her not really being as committed with the task force as she maybe publicly indicated, but our position was that she was going to oppose oversight board. Didn't matter what proposal came to her. Didn't matter if it came from God.
All right. I want to turn to
But I want to mention something else about that meeting.
Please.
The real reason why that meeting was important wasn't the task force, and I want to say something about this personally. For us, the reason why the meeting was important was the task force, but the second reason, from my perspective, was that we conveyed some important concerns about policing in Nashville based upon some email transactions that we saw, based upon our conversations with community leaders. And the most important concern was our fear of surveillance and intimidation by MNPD. And this concern was based upon two incidences. One was an email that was sent to council in which a person from, we presume from MNPD, lifted some Facebook posts. I think a couple were from personal accounts, not from our community oversight account, and included those Facebook posts in the email that was circulated to council that propagated some misinformation and inaccuracies, quite frankly, that I think had racial overtones or were racist. That's my personal opinion. But also throughout the COB campaign, and even before the campaign, just in terms of working on police reform in general, that we're always constantly warned by community leaders, in some cases by even folks in MNPD or retired MNPD personnel, to be careful about how you move forward. Be careful about intimidation. Don't talk to the police. Don't challenge the police. Be careful about Chief Anderson. He's been there for 45 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that may be hearsay, suspicion, overly cautious behavior, but that narrative is so prevalent among activists that, from my perspective, in the agenda of the meeting, I personally raised that to Megan Berry. That, from my perspective, as chief executive of a city, it's important that you know that there are activists in this community who feel that, and who are being warned to be careful about intimidation and surveillance. And I personally asked Megan Berry, told Megan Berry that. And that was seconded by at least 3 people in the room, because I felt that she had to be put on notice that you have to protect your people. And some of these people voted for you. And you either have to convey that to the chief or to whoever, that, you know, if there are concerns here, and if this is true, then back off. Now, having said all that, I would not have brought that up had I known about Robert Forrest's affair. And if I were to ask most of my friends, would you have raised an issue about intimidation and surveillance had you known, most of them would have said no. Because the belief that I would have had was that I don't know who's going to get back to. Why am I going to raise the issue about surveillance and intimidation with MNPD if you have an affair with the head of security and you're dealing with a 45-year police chief who we're told things don't get past them? Why would I even bring that up to you? There's no way I would have brought that up, for fear that it would have got back to people that I would have been cautious about engaging, like, around those issues. So for me, that was a personal issue, that as to why this issue and why that conversation was important.
Anything else significant about that meeting before we turn to the other issues?
No, I mean, just that, you know, I mean, from my perspective, she could, whatever policy she chooses to back, that's her decision for whatever reason. But when you're dealing with concerns about intimidation and surveillance, and particularly young people who are being monitored on Facebook and surveillance, and when people are coming to you with that personally, and she, and it's repeated on several occasions in that meeting, trust is the most important thing. You have to have trust in the room for that conversation to take place. And in retrospect, frankly, when this incident happened with Robert Forrest, I was like, there's no way I would have brought that up with Megan Berry had I even known, had this even come up. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that the former mayor did was a race and dialogue discussions. Can you tell the board members who may not be familiar with it what that was?
Well, in the summer of 2016, there are two killings that again garner national attention. Philando Castile in, I believe, Minnesota, and Sterling in Louisiana. I believe I got the locations correct. And then there was a third shooting of a of Dallas police officers, which garnered a national attention. So in response to the incidences, the Black Lives Matter of Nashville group had a vigil downtown that was attended by some of the mayor's people. And I guess hundreds of people were there. Some people speculate maybe about 1,000 people were there. And then a march ensued afterwards. So in response to those events, the mayor pulled together a race dialogue session, which was a community conversation that was spearheaded, that was initiated about policing concerns. And the first, I think, conversation may have taken place at Procon, and then there were subsequent conversations. So those conversations became known as the race dialogue conversations, in which the instigator of those conversations were concerns directly about policing. So in September 2017, the Berry administration released this race dialogue report. And in the report, there were different policy items around housing, around health, and policing got half a page maybe, even though the race dialogue sessions emerged out of policing. My concern about the report is that the report, although initiated because of policing concerns, it excluded 4 major items about policing that affected Nashville. Missing from the report were the following: the Jacquez Clemens killing, erased from the report as if it never happened, or not included as if it never happened. The Drive All Black study that was released in late 2016 by Gideon's Army, I believe October 2016, which involved at least 20 or 30 activists working on that. We now know that it's been empirically verified because it's been seconded by the Policing Project. Missing from that was the Department of Justice Community Relations Service Division that came to Nashville in May of 2017 and talked with community leaders and produced a report at the behest of the Metro Human Relations Commission. That was missing from the report. Of course, missing from the report was Community Oversight Board discussions which had been taking place all around the city for the previous 6 months. So there were 4 items missing from the report, and at least 3 of the items you can argue were the most important things that happened to police reform and policing conversations in Nashville in 20 years. That is the Jacquez Clemens killing, that is the Drive On Black report, and that is the Department of Justice's Community Relations Service visit and report. And those 3 things collectively, there were thousands of people involved in those, particularly the race dialogue report. So my concern with the race dialogue report is how can mysteriously three of the most important things that happened to policing in Nashville in the last 20 years, including a killing, be missing from a report that was initiated because of policing. You just can't put something in, they used to call it the dustbins of history. You can't do that. And there's no explanation for that, although there's no explanation for that that we have. Although I asked folks, but I didn't get no explanation.
And included in the materials submitted to the board is that race and dialogue report. How long would you estimate that report to be?
I mean, I don't know how long it is. I assume it's over 20 pages, but I'm not entirely sure of the exact page number, quite frankly.
Well, one of the things you said of the 4 that were missing, the Jacquez Clemens killing, the Driving While Black report, the Department of Justice Service, what light did they paint the Metro Nashville Police Department in?
Oh, emphatically, I mean, the race dialogue report, the initial series of conversations, the Community Oversight Board was actually a proposal that came out of that report. The Department of Justice Community Relations Service Division study found major problems in MNPD, including institutional bias. It reinforced the exact same thing that the Drive On Black report did and the Policing Project report did. And it itself also proposed an advisory committee or an oversight committee of some way, shape, or form for Nashville. And of course, the Jacquez Clemens killing, one of the main things that came out of that were 6 demands. One of the demands by community activists on the ground was was an oversight board. The exclusion of Jacquez Clemens killing is the biggest violation, and for reasons that Megan Barry should be frankly ashamed of, and that is because the activists that came out of the Jacquez Coalition, when you have killings that take place, although there's a negative light shed upon activists, they're considered to be too militant, and they're considered to be this. What the activists actually do is they save Nashville from catching fire. They actually saved Nashville from erupting in potentially violent confrontations and violent clashes. And so by excluding the Jacquez Clemens killing from that, you're excluding the work that activists did, but you're also excluding the possibility that the activists might have saved your city from burning.
So in the former mayor's race and dialogue report, out of police killings prompted by that discussion, what mention did it make of institutional bias in the police department?
My recollection is that I don't think it mentioned institutional bias. At the most, regarding police reform, it talked about Megan Barry's body camera task force and her initiation of the body camera stuff, but it did not link the body camera stuff back to the Jacquez Clemens killings, which it was. It didn't link it back to institutional bias.
Did the race and dialogue report say anything about police shootings of citizens?
I can't recall explicitly where that was said, but I have to go back and look at it to verify it. But if it was inferred, if it was implicit, but I can't explicitly state that. I think it mentioned police shootings maybe at a national level, it made an inference to that at a national level, or incidences across the country. It kind of dressed it up, but there was no direct, from my recollection, one-to-one relationship.
And did the race and dialogue report say anything about a community oversight board?
My recollection is there was no mention of a community oversight board in that report, or oversight advisory committee, or whatever the case might be. There are different variations of that proposal that came out. Yeah.
Anything else significant about the erasure in that report, or before we move on to the next topic?
No, it's just that, I mean, I find it, I mean, just as a, just me being in the academy, you can't erase history like that. Maybe it's just my own personal parochial interests, so forth, but if you do it once, it's one thing, twice, another thing, 3 times, there's something going on there, and there's just some things that raise certain levels of suspicion. I mean, I heard her staff wrote the report, but, I mean, we all, I don't know.
You said you made an open records request, and as a result, you found some emails. What were those emails that we've included in the materials?
Yeah, we made an open records request in January 2018, and so a lot of the emails we found were not part of a search and destroy mission that we found accidentally. Quite frankly, we didn't necessarily ask for them, but because of the way that we asked, because of our search request, they included them in the open records request. Probably the 2 things that I think cause concern is that 3 things. Number 1, it's clear that MNPD was monitoring Community Oversight Now's Facebook page because they were circulating some posts. I'm sorry, it's clear that MNPD was monitoring the Facebook pages of member organizations in Community Oversight Now. So not necessarily Oversight Now, but member groups, because they were circulating some of the Facebook pages in emails and communication, specifically about the Oversight Board proposal. Number 2 is that the email that I found odd, maybe I think 2 emails, but at least because some of the emails are duplicates, was that particularly regarding the legislation that was circulating in council in November, MNPD circulated an email that CC'd Robert Force. And I have no idea why the head of security would be CC'd on council legislation, especially given the fact that in 99% of the cases, Megan Barry does not personally visit council. I mean, if she were to visit council and bring her security to council, that's one thing. But if you're not going to visit council in 99% of the cases, why are you being circulated an email about, or CC to the email about policy, to me is quite interesting. It's, would the head of Secret Service be CC'd on legislation about being discussed by the House Judiciary Committee, or would Haslam Security being CC'd regarding legislation for the Senate Judiciary Committee? I mean, so I found that to be at least suspicious. And then one thing that may or may not be important is just that it was clear that the Berry administration wanted to get ahead of, if not bury, this community oversight board. There's one email in which the mayor's finance director, Richard Bling, emailed Chief Anderson specifically asking him to hurry up with his decision regarding the policing project to get ahead of activists. In other words, we believe that's code word to say that bring the policing project here as a way to curtail the community oversight board proposal. Yeah.
So in addition to that email from the chief finance officer, there was another email that was CC'd to Robert Forrest directly, right?
That's the first email that I'm talking about, in which the legislation is being considered. Because there's a conversation, as there should be, going on in MNPD about community oversight board proposal, as there should be. I'm not knocking that, but among the senior staff of MNPD. But when the head of security is CC'd specifically on the council legislation going through first reading, that to me seems to be very odd and suspicious on my part.
So let's unpackage that a little bit. At that time, there was pending legislation for first reading by the council.
At the time, the legislation on November 7th was going up for first reading.
And this legislation was going to be about potential community oversight.
The legislation was specifically designed to establish an oversight board, and it was going through first reading
And
on
the
November
mayor
7th.
doesn't have a vote in that matter, to your
The mayor doesn't have a vote. Usually first readings, we have a councilwoman here. It's kind of a consent reading, or consent vote. So, yeah, it's kind of mundane, yeah.
And sort of inadvertently in your open records request, one of the emails you received came from who and was sent to who?
I'm not exactly sure which. It was some of the senior command, but not by name. I'm not entirely sure what name, but I do know that Robert Forrest was CC'd on it. And like I said, this whole incident with Megan Berry had never happened. I wouldn't even have known who Robert Forrest was or is. Yeah.
And what was the final result of that legislation?
Well, the legislation, it failed the council. Yeah.
Anything else significant about the open records request that you reviewed?
Nothing that no. A lot of stuff was happening, but nothing that I want to talk about.
Anything else that you want to present to the board regarding Megan Berry and Robert Forrest's relationship and how it impacted policy decisions?
Well, I go back to that meeting with Megan Berry, and I go back to this idea that as a personal thing, because for me, most of my life experiences have been be careful about talking to the police. Don't talk to the police if there's a murder, if there's a street shooting, because you don't know who the officers are working with. They may be working with the people who did the shooting. I mean, I've had, civil rights leaders tell me this, family members tell me this, middle class. So, and a lot of it is perception. A lot of it may not even be true. Some of it may be true. But the point I want to say is that's the dominant narrative. The dominant narrative, the less dominant narrative that I've had to face is you work with police. In other words, most of my existence has been be careful who you talk to regarding the policing issues, even if it's on crime reduction, because you never know who's in the room, and you never know who's working with people who are committing crimes. On this policing issue, in particular the Community Oversight Board, we had community leaders tell us, be careful how you push on MNPD, be careful how you push on Chief Anderson, be careful about the FOP. These are not just, stereotypical activists. These are community leaders telling us this. So then, when I go back to this incident in Megan Berry, I personally made it a point. I'm going to ask her that you have to protect your people. You got young people whose Facebook are being surveyed. Ask the chief about it. There are 3 other people in the room who weighed in on it. Protect your people. If I had known that she had an affair with Robert Forrest, that's her decision. I make no personal judgment about that. And that in any way got back to Forrest, and Forrest had a direct line to Anderson, that would have been my conclusion. Maybe that's suspicion, maybe that's perception. There's no way I would have brought that up in the meeting. There's no way I would have brought it up in the meeting. To me, that's a public safety issue. You can't bring activists in the room to have that kind of conversation if there's a conflict of interest.
Those are my questions for you, Ms. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Dr. Franklin.
Good morning.
Do I understand your testimony to be correct, that it's your belief or your opinion that Megan Berry was against or not in favor of the Community Oversight Board?
Well, she said she opposed it personally. I mean, like in a conversation with our community, officially, she said, I oppose the Community Oversight Board proposal.
Okay.
As is, or whatever the case might be. So, yeah.
And David Briley's the current mayor, correct?
Yes.
What do you believe David Briley was for the Community Oversight Board?
As vice mayor, he seemed to be sympathetic to the oversight board, according to what we believe. But as mayor, he seemed to be less sympathetic. He said he was opposed, he supported the oversight, but he opposed the oversight board proposal that we put forward.
So you wouldn't suggest that David Briley was for the Community Oversight Board that you were proposing?
I would not suggest that. No, I would not suggest that.
Okay. You
Not
mentioned-
initially, at least. Now he is, of course, because he has no choice. Speak on that.
And you mentioned, if I heard you right, Steve Anderson being chief of police for 45 years. You don't mean to imply that he was chief of police for 45 years?
No, he was chief of police he was in the MAPD for 45 years.
Right. And do you agree that he was chief of police before Megan Berry became mayor?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But not for 45 years?
No, he was in MPD for 45 years.
Okay. I understand you testifying about the race dialogue report.
Yes, sir.
You don't have any personal knowledge about who actually wrote or contributed to the writing of the report, do you?
Yes, I do, but I'm not willing to say it.
Okay. Well, who are those people that contributed?
It was the mayor's staff from what I'm hearing.
Okay.
That's what I'm hearing, but I'm not entirely sure that, I don't have 100% confirmation, but what I'm hearing it was the mayor's staff, but I don't have beyond that, I don't have anything else.
Okay, and who on the mayor's staff, if you heard, contributed to the?
I don't have anything to say about that.
Okay, well, do you know, or do you have an opinion?
I don't have any confirmation of who did it.
Okay, so
I don't have 100% confirmation of who the mayor's staff did it.
Fair enough. So you don't know?
Not 100%, no.
Okay. You weren't a part of the deliberations to actually put that in writing, I assume, were you?
The race dialogue report?
Right.
No.
Okay. Did you attend the September meeting that the report references?
No, I did not.
Okay. But that was a meeting open to the public, correct, to your knowledge?
You can say that, depending upon how you want to measure that.
Well, what would you say?
I would say that, yes, it was open to the public, but the heavy presence of MNPD folks in full uniform was so intimidating that some people left.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's open to the public officially, but unofficially, that intimidation turned people away.
Okay. And you referenced, I think, 3 different emails that you received as a result of a January 2018 open records request. Is that right?
There were, to my knowledge, 2 emails The third email, I'm not sure if it was a duplicate email, but there were 2 emails that I'm familiar with.
Okay. And on those 2 emails, those weren't emails to or from Megan Berry, were they?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if Megan Berry was CC'd to any of the emails, so she might have been, but I can't 100% remember.
Well, based on your review of those documents, you can't tell from a review that she received them, correct?
Those emails, quite frankly, I don't remember if she was CC'd to those emails or not.
Okay.
From my knowledge, she wasn't, but there were so many emails that she was CC'd, her staff was CC'd to, that I just don't know if that email included her CC.
Okay. Nothing further.
Yeah.
So, do we have an extra copy of the exhibits to give the witness so we can discuss the emails? Does anyone have an? And I just have a few questions, I think, just to make sure I understand this document that was submitted, and that was just the subject of questioning both on direct and cross. I see 2 emails. One is dated October 20, and one is dated November 7. On the October 20 email, it is from Michael Alexander, MNPD, to then several individuals, including Chief Anderson. And it looks like I can't tell, it looks like it perhaps is a cut and paste of a Facebook page, basic, trying to get an action alert type of thing.
Yes.
And is that, do you understand that cut from the Facebook page? Was that from a public Facebook page, an organization's or a group's public-facing Facebook page? Or is it not possible to tell from this document?
That was from I don't know if it's from an email or a Facebook page.
Okay.
From what I'm familiar with, that would have been a supporting organization or a person in support of the Oversight Board. But I don't think that particular email was part of an official communication posted by the Community Oversight Board Facebook account.
And if you can just, my understanding of this document is it looks like it's a email from initially on October 20th at 10:29 from Douglas Bell of MNPD to 2 people, Michael Alexander and Sergeant Forrest. And then that's then forwarded on the same day to the Chief Anderson. And the subject is a phone and email campaign with the email subject line, Mayor Berry support the Community Oversight Board, or support the community. So an action alert to have Mayor Berry support the oversight.
And just for clarification, our legislation was submitted somewhere around October 10th or 11th.
Okay.
So it was submitted before the week deadline. I think council, you may have a week before you submit legislation, or I forgot what the actual. We submitted it like 3 weeks in advance, in part because of I think there's some concerns about fall break and those kinds of things. So we didn't want to take any chances.
Really, I'm just trying to understand what I'm looking at with this piece of paper. The other second email is a November 7th email, and that is from Douglas Bell, MNPD, to Gordon Howie. I can't see it that well, it's small font, and then CC to a few individuals, including Sergeant Forrest, There, they are talking about the community, I guess, the council meeting that you described in your direct testimony. There's a comment there that looks like it's updating individuals on the email that says, updated numbers 69 say they're going to 65 interested. Is that, do you know what that reference is?
That would be a Facebook post that whenever there's an event that's created, an official event from a Facebook page, then you could say, are you going, are you interested? And that's them. If you see 54 are going, 219 are interested to the council meeting.
So that would be of the individuals interested in this
Yes.
Okay, below that it says no change in narrative.
Yeah.
Do you know what that refers to? What is your understanding of what that refers to? I guess I can't tell if that's
That would
taken
be,
from the Facebook page, or is it part of the
no, that would be a narrative.
content of the email between the individuals on this email?
That would be, I think that would be in reference to, if you go down to the second half of that page, from organizers. So the narrative is, independence, outside of the police department and agency. That's the narrative. The narrative that we had.
It's the COB narrative.
It's a COB
Okay,
narrative.
okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, independence, accountability. Yeah. So they're documenting that, and there's other things that we had along with an email that was sent anonymously to, I think it was sent anonymously to Metro Council that got back to us, and again, along these lines too, we're having community leaders telling us that they're getting word to be very careful. So that then prompted me to ask Megan Berry in that conversation as chief executive that I want you to be aware that this is a concern that we have. It's a public safety issue. And that's what my personal question to Megan Berry was about.
Okay, and one last question about that very question. What was the mayor's response to you when you described concern about intimidation and surveillance?
Her response was, I said, we're concerned about intimidation and surveillance of some of our folks. And us, again, particularly some of the member organizations that disproportionately lean towards young. And she said, from whom? And that's when others in the room chimed in and said from MMPD, from Chief Anderson. And then a pretty robust conversation in the room occurred around that conversation. There are others in the room who chimed in, but I don't feel comfortable speaking for them, who chimed in much more harshly than I did.
But we do not know, and nor is it knowable with who we have here in the room, whether the mayor ever did follow up with the chief or anyone else with that concern. We don't know that. Do we?
There was never any, we never received any assurance from her after the meeting that there was a conversation that took place, that she had addressed the issue. But that part of the conversation was probably the most intense part of the discussion. That led to the most intense part of the discussion, including, again, there were some folks who pretty much were direct with Megan Berry, like, you got to deal with this. I was kind of more academic, quite frankly, but other people in the room were pretty clear, like, let me tell you what's happening out here in these communities about surveillance, intimidation, about what we're up against, and you have to know it, you have to respond to it, you have to. It's on your table. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? No.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
Appreciate it.
Let me just interject here briefly. We're at 11 a.m. Based on sort of timeline with each witness, I would think maybe we'll wrap up this witness break for lunch briefly and come back afterward for closing statements and deliberation, unless anyone on the board has any thoughts to the contrary. Okay, you can call your next witness.
Well, just to clarify, the third witness is actually just going to make the closing statement, so that's the conclusion of all of our testifying
Oh,
witnesses.
okay. Well, maybe, I guess probably then we can wrap up closing statements, and after we see how long that takes, we can determine about lunch. Okay, thank you. I'm ready.
I guess I misunderstood. Can we take a 5-minute break?
Would you like to take a break now? Yeah, that's fine. We can do that. Yeah. That'd be good, actually. Thank you. Order here. Actually, before we proceed with closing statements, there was one additional comment and question from Diane, and I'll turn it over to her. Oh,
It's actually for council.
yeah.
Council, I actually have one quick question, just a little follow-on. In looking at the complaints submitted, there is an allegation in the complaint about a exchange at the December 2017 meeting that you presented testimony on. And I'm wondering if there's anyone here today that can testify to it. It is the part of the complaint which alleges that during that December 2017 meeting, at one point, a pastor asked then Mayor Barry about the allegation is the master asked her flat out about of the public disrespect that the chief had consistently shown her, specifically when he held a press conference on the day of Clemens' investigation. Findings were announced, and at the same time, she, the TBA, the DA were holding their official press conference asking, quote, what does he, meaning Chief Anderson, have over you? The allegation continues. The mayor at that point surveyed the room with an anxious look and soon after abruptly left the meeting. Do you have anyone here today that can testify as to that?
I second was there.
So I guess I would like to hear testimony on that. Since it's not a verified complaint, we can't take any of the allegations as findings, as factual. We would need testimony.
Yeah. And I will remind, just so everyone understands the procedural context, our ordinance does allow the board to unilaterally call witnesses that we want to call, in addition to those that the parties have presented. I see a hand in the back of someone who said he does have personal knowledge here, so we would ask you to come forward and introduce yourself. We're going to have to swear you in. It's going to be under oath, and then Ms. Deani will ask you questions. So,
I'm Arnold Hayes. I'm a member of Community Oversight now.
okay, thank you, Mr. Hayes. Elizabeth, will you please swear the witness?
Is this an H-A-Y-E-S?
H-A-Y-E-S.
Okay.
Mr. Hayes,
Arnold.
do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to let you actually ask the question.
I just have a few questions. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes?
Hayes.
Mr. Hayes, thank you. Mr. Hayes, were you at the December 21st, 2017 meeting with Mayor Barry?
Yes, I was.
Regarding the matter under discussion? And when you were there, was there a discussion that you recall of the concerns about possible surveillance and intimidation by the FOB?
Yes.
You recall that conversation?
Yes.
Do you have a fairly good recollection of that meeting as you sit here today?
Not a lot of the details, but it did stand out when I heard you ask the question about that there was someone that asked, what does what does Chief Anderson have on you? I specifically remember that very clear.
Can you just tell the board about what you recall about that specific discussion?
There have been a number of discussions about the intimidation, the surveillance, that there were people really that were citizens that in a sense were in fear. And that there was and I think you said that in your notes, that there was a pastor that actually asked that particular question because it seemed like the mayor, if I recall, it seemed like she was very evasive about that and uncomfortable about that particular discussion. And then that person asked that question, what does Chief Anderson or what does he have on you? I do remember that
Question. And do you recall what the mayor said in response?
I don't recall. I do know that when we first started the meeting, it was kind of strange. We were expecting to discuss the task force that she was going to assemble, and I think she said right off the bat, because I had been in some other meetings with the mayor concerning the Community Oversight Board, but she was. She said I thought she said she didn't want to discuss. She was not going to discuss the Community Oversight Board. I don't recall that exactly, but it seemed like it was something. But then the meeting seemed like it ended very abruptly, and it must have been around the time that statement was made. But I don't recall if that was exactly when the meeting ended. But I do remember the meeting ended abruptly.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Does anyone else on the board have questions for Mr. Hayes?
Okay.
Mr. Garrison, would you like to examine the witness at all?
Mr. Chairman?
Okay.
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 Thank you very much. Okay, with that said, unless anyone would like to interject, we will proceed to closing statements. Since this is a closing statement and not testimony, we're not going to swear the witness. If there is going to be any testimonial component to it, let us know now, and we would need to swear you under oath.
No, I'm just going to
Okay.
read the statement.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to be clear, by that instruction, do you mean the closing argument should be limited to the evidence that's before the board and not presenting new evidence in closing argument?
I think that's correct. We're not taking additional evidence at this point. The testimony's in, the documents that have been submitted are in, and
Although if Mr. Garrison has evidence, do you have evidence that you would like to submit testimonial?
If this would be the time.
otherwise?
If there's anything additional that you would like to
Because
submit at
he
this
hasn't-
point.
He hasn't had kind of an opportunity to put in a case.
Right, I guess they have closed their case, it's
Right,
our turn.
right.
We don't have any evidence or testimony to
Okay,
offer,
yeah.
and so we will close our case.
Okay, I appreciate that. And people have to forgive me.
But I
on
want
that.
to be clear that there's no more new evidence being offered at this time, it's just closing argument. Is that
The
right, Mr.
complainant
Chairman?
has rested their case in chief, based on my understanding of what has been said, and they're ready to go for closing statements. You've indicated that you're not going to present any additional evidence, Mr. Garrison, and so at this point, the evidence would be closed.
Correct, I'm just asking for that.
Yeah, thank you, and
Sure.
forgive the non-litigator in me. We are proceeding as per our procedures. Unless anyone else on the board has any questions or would, like Diane, like to raise any additional witnesses or testimony to solicit. Okay, you can proceed with your closing statement at this point.
I would just ask that if there is something that she says that Mr. Garrison finds objectionable, just to wait until so as not to interrupt the flow of her closing statement, if he would just raise that during his portion of the closing statement instead of interrupting Ms. Murphy.
Yeah, and I think it's clear that our procedures, that's how they read, the closing statements proceed in sequence.
And
Mr. Chairman, my request, I don't want to interrupt Ms. Murphy who's making a closing argument. And I don't want to cross-examine Ms. Murphy if she's not offering new testimony. I won't interrupt her, but I would ask that you, Mr. Chairman, make any rulings if we're hearing about new evidence and new testimony and not allow that to all, be brought in a closing argument, since
guess my thought would be that we don't want to be overly formalistic. We are here to hear evidence. If evidence comes in through this witness that there's a determination it's new, can we receive it as evidence, allow Mr. Garrison to cross-examine the then, sworn witness?
I would propose this, because it's a little bit of a gray area if it's not an attorney presenting, and I'm not sure whether or
And
not
I
you
would
have
like to say, I
any
am not an
new
attorney.
information, Ms.
And when I
Murphy?
wrote this, I was writing this with the intention of summing it up. If there is anything that is in my closing statement
Yeah.
that can be considered evidence legally, it was not my intention to introduce new evidence.
Okay, and I'm fine with that.
Ms. Murphy is represented by counsel, very capable counsel, somebody who's tried dozens of lawsuits, so I'm acting as though Ms. Murphy's represented by counsel, because she is.
Sure.
So, but I don't intend to interrupt, I haven't interrupted this entire day, I just would like an orderly proceeding, and I think that everybody's entitled to one.
Okay, but I'm not clear if there's a request, Mr. Garrison. Are you asking that her counsel give the closing statement, or are you asking that she be sworn?
No, I'm asking
Okay.
that Mr. Chairman, that you make rulings if the closing argument is so obviously a testimony. I understand we're not in a court of law. I'm not asking you to, I was simply raising the issue and asking that you rule, and I will commit to not interrupting unless something extraordinary.
I understand, and the
I
intent.
haven't interrupted all day, and I won't interrupt. It was a very simple request.
No, I understand,
I
Mr.
just think
Garrison,
that
and
the
the
scope of the hearing, since the case has been closed, it's important to keep the scope as it is.
Mr. Garrison, I think the only question I'm wondering about is what ruling would you have the chair make? A ruling to strike that part of her closing because it should be treated as evidence and therefore we should not consider it, or to reopen in order to swear the witness and give you an opportunity to cross-examine her?
I'd ask that the chairman ask Ms. Murphy to move on. If she's talking about meetings that happened in 1998, well, there's no evidence of any meetings that happened in 1998. Ask her to move on from the meetings in 1998.
Okay,
Okay.
Have an
We-
absurd example.
Okay.
Mr.
That's
Garrison,
all I'm asking.
we will.
And again, I think there's probably been more discussion than necessary.
We will proceed in an orderly fashion, but the intent here is not to present new information at this point, it's to sum up the information that's already been presented, and for purposes of the board's deliberation, that is how we will treat your statement. I will interject if I feel like you've gone off into new territory. Fair warning, but with that said, you can proceed with your closing statement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have heard from Mrs. Lee and Dr. Franklin about how the Berry administration failed the people of Nashville. We have heard from Mrs. Lee, who represents a constituency which does not often have an opportunity to speak directly to people in power without filters and without gatekeepers, about how the Berry administration's failure to listen to and address the concerns of citizens had a personal impact. We have heard from Dr. Franklin about how the Berry administration viewed an active and engaged community as a threat instead of an asset. Instead of listening to what the most affected people were saying, that police in their communities were not helping but were actually harming them, the administration went above and beyond to undermine community organizing efforts. The administration's tone deafness to the needs of the most vulnerable of Nashville citizens has not been an abstraction. The consequences have been a life and death matter. The Berry administration was emblematic of everything the constituents hate about government: elitist, insensitive, unresponsive, venal, and corrupt. There is a widespread sense of cynicism about local government that was not there a year ago. Former Mayor Berry's disgraceful downfall has caused Nashvillians to feel embarrassed and lose any sense of trust that government is working for them. Since her resignation and the subsequent political maneuverings and seemingly endless elections, people are fed up. Former Mayor Berry's actions are directly responsible for that. The revelation of the affair and her subsequent resignation after admitting guilt has created a climate in which the public now questions the integrity of all of her policy positions and every initiative she originated while in office. At this point, the taint of her admission of guilt has spread far beyond issues of policing and public policy and now includes questions about how she generally had handled the city's business while in office. If a mayor who admits to stealing funds and resigns from office after pleading guilty to a felony has not violated the standards of conduct, then I don't know who can. Her misdeeds are the very definition of offenses which violate the standards. The way she left office shows that her priority at all times was to protect herself and her personal image, rather than to be accountable to the people of Nashville. She has left more questions than answers, and many of those questions will never be answered, making it more difficult to find the flaws in the system and fix them so that this does not happen again. That is disgraceful from someone who was supposed to be the guardians of the public trust. Mayor Berry chose to protect herself over the needs of the people of Nashville. This is the essence of unethical conduct. As Attorney Yoon stated in his opening, only one disposition is available to you at this time. The board was created to provide the community direct oversight of the actions of Metro government officials and employees. The actions taken by this board represent the values of the citizens of Nashville. Therefore, it is imperative that this vote recommend that former Mayor Berry be censured. To fail to censure former Mayor Berry is to send the message that it's fine for Metro employees and elected officials to lie. It's okay for them to commit felonies in office. It's perfectly okay with us, the citizens of Nashville, for them to leave office under a cloud after having brought dishonor and disgrace to city government. It's okay for them to make secret deals with prosecutors, which is perfectly legal, but which keeps us as citizens from knowing exactly what happened and precludes any real hope of transparency. You will send the message that anyone who has personal friends in city government can get away with anything. What little trust in Metro government will be completely gone, as citizens will believe that those in power care only about their own selfish interests, special deals for special people. Everything about this case has been extraordinary and not in a good way. We would like nothing better than to move on. But my experience as a crisis counselor informs me that we cannot move forward and heal as a city without calling out and naming the source of the damage, and the damage has been done. We have to condemn it in the most emphatic way before we can move forward and truly put this behind us. A vote for censure will go a long way toward facilitating much-needed healing. A vote for censure would also make it harder for anyone who holds the highest office in this city to betray the people's trust. Please send the message that we expect all of our government employees and elected officials to do their jobs with the highest level of integrity, and that we will not accept or tolerate anything less than that.
Thank you. Mr. Garrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board. You're a citizens board. Everybody except Councilwoman Allen is just an ordinary citizen in Nashville. She's an ordinary citizen that ordinary citizens have elected to serve on Metro Council. But you're not just a citizens board. You're not an informal group of people. You're not somebody that just got together to talk about issues of concern. You're a governmental board, and you're acting under the color of law. The Tennessee Supreme Court in a case called Willis versus Tennessee Department of Corrections, citing to Harding Academy versus Metropolitan Government, also citing to Lafferty versus City of Winchester, said something that I'm going to repeat to you. And of course, those of you who are lawyers, I think most of the people I'm looking at right now are lawyers, know that I could cite this basic principle in a number of cases. It says this is upon a writ challenging a board's decision. It says this writ provides a limited scope of review by the courts. Review of Metro's actions in this case is limited to determining whether the board exceeded its jurisdiction, followed by an unlawful procedure, acted illegally, arbitrarily, or fraudulently, or acted without material evidence in support of its decision. I just want to focus on the last part of that standard, which is what I think this board has to ask itself. The board does not have to ask itself, have you heard from citizens with important concerns? You have. You've fulfilled that duty. You've accommodated the duty based with your schedules. You're all here. You've accommodated the public by having this meeting in one of the largest rooms that was available to you for this hearing. That's not the question of whether you have provided Ms. Murphy with an appropriate hearing. You clearly have. The question is, what is the material evidence before you? Both witnesses, there were two witnesses and certain documents that are before, there's testimony from two witnesses, and there's a handful of documents that are before this board. That's your material evidence. You've heard from two witnesses who both talked about their personal feelings about Megan Barry and her political positions and her policy positions. I would submit to you that those individuals who are important members of this community, who are active, who obviously can care deeply for this community, they had political differences with Megan Barry. They had political differences with her policy positions. They had political differences with how she handled important issues in the public. They both testified of their personal concerns. Nobody testified today who had any firsthand knowledge about Megan Barry's decision-making, about her policy positions, though at one time during the proceedings leading up to this hearing, it was contemplated that subpoenas would be requested of former Mayor Barry's staff. They weren't. Counsel for this board opined that this board had subpoena power. I may not have agreed with that, but the board entertained the notion that it had power to compel witnesses. This board could have compelled witnesses that were a part of the public policy decision-making. Ms. Murphy could have requested that. She withdrew those requests. So it's not as though it's impossible to have examined this. There's just not material evidence concerning public policy positions that were established by the mayor. And the documents that are before you don't suggest that either. In fact, the report that's been alluded to came out of a September 2016 meeting before the affair at issue began. Dr. Franklin testified when I cross-examined him and reiterated his testimony that he understood from those meetings and maybe otherwise as well that Megan Barry's position was that she was against a community oversight board. I think it's alluded to by the complaint that was because of her relationship with Sergeant Forrest. He also testified that David Briley was against the community oversight board. That's his opinion. But he's not alleging that Mayor Briley engaged in anything inappropriate. My point here is to connect the dots based on the evidence that's before you about why a policy position or a political position that's perceived by a member of the community is what it is impossible based on those set of facts. It's complete innuendo. Dr. Franklin testified about the race dialogue report. If you read it, Megan Barry signed her name on the second page. There's an introduction written. But he didn't testify he testified about what he didn't like that wasn't included. He's clearly very troubled by what he believes wasn't included. But he doesn't have any firsthand knowledge about who contributed to that report and why something was included and why something wasn't included. It's a nearly 40-page document. My guess is the authors can't tell you every reason why something was included and something wasn't included. People are allowed to have political disagreements. We have those through elections. We have those through referendums. That's politics. But there's nothing before the board that any of the political or policy decisions, including that report, were done because of something improper. Lastly, a board member called Arnold Hayes as a witness, and his specific testimony was that he doesn't recall, or I don't recall, what Ms. Berry said in response to the question concerning Chief Anderson that's a part of the allegations. That's the evidence before this board. I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the day. What the complainant's asking you to do is make a ruling and take an action that, if you look at your rules, what it will do is refer a request for censure to the council person who chairs the Rules Committee. And then that council person is directed to propose a resolution seeking the censure of Megan Berry, a private citizen now. And then the 40-member council will be asked to deliberate again about these incidents that were disclosed nearly a year ago. That's what you're being asked to do. Metro Council formed a special investigation committee 10 months ago, 11 months ago, somewhere in that range. The investigation committee interviewed and considered hiring private law firms, and then proposed a certain law firm to be engaged by Metro. Metro took action on that. Metro Council also took the action after being well informed about the circumstances of Megan Berry's resignation and being informed of her resignation to disband that committee. But in the meantime, Metro's auditor, their own internal auditor who reports to Metro Council, was engaged in its an audit investigation. Those findings have been provided to this board by Ms. Waits during the course of these proceedings. They're publicly available. They made no findings of inappropriate or misappropriated funds. None. He could not establish it. Metro Council's well aware of that because the auditor reported that to Metro Council. Metro Council decided to not take any action. I'm not here arguing Metro has taken some sort of contrary action to what Ms. Murphy would like you to take. I'm not telling you that Metro Council has taken some affirmative action to view facts or circumstances surrounding these allegations differently. I'm simply telling you they've chosen on multiple occasions to put this in the past. And for good reason, not covering anything up. This matter was investigated by the TBI, was considered by the district attorney. It was resolved by the district attorney. This matter has been considered by Metro Council. Metro Council had an investigatory committee established and had counsel readily available to it and decided to disband that. And Metro Council has been privy to an auditor's report and has decided to disband that. And I would submit to you that in all of those circumstances and all of those processes, Metro Council has had exponentially more information, evidence, material evidence before it when making those decisions. You have substantially less, and I would submit no material evidence that supports the allegations. I'm perfectly capable of reading each allegation to you and pointing out how there's no material evidence before this board. I suspect that the board doesn't want me to do that. I would ask that the board, in its deliberations, to not even consider the notion that the board has not fulfilled its duty. The board has heard a citizen's complaint through a full hearing, considering every witness and every piece of evidence that the complainant has brought forward. That duty's been fulfilled. But this board has to act under the color of law, and it's bound to act with the material evidence that's before it. Because decisions by this board can be reviewed by Chancery Court, can be reviewed by the Court of Appeals, can be reviewed by the Tennessee Supreme Court. That's again because even though we're here to discuss, in a way, politics and public policy disagreement, we're actually here to provide a due process and an orderly process. I thank you for your time. I ask that you deny the complainant's request. It's not that we're not hearing from people. It's that when material evidence doesn't support the findings that are being requested, this board too needs to move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Our procedures do allow for a rebuttal. I'm not sure whether the complainant wishes to make one.
No.
No?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's currently 11:47. I'd be inclined to move forward with deliberations at this point unless anyone on the board objects.
I agree.
Okay. Well, I think the way we do this then is to just open it up for deliberation and comment by the board. We do discuss these things in public. If there are any questions of a legal nature that the board feels would be better discussed privately with counsel, we can call an executive session, and any board member can request that. At this time, I'll open it up for commentary and deliberation. And I'll note at the outset my understanding, the way that, I'm thinking of this anyway, which is there's really two elements to the complaint before us and two things that are presently before us that Mr. Klein's office analyzed. The first of them what relates to what I'll generally call sort of the undue influence component, and the other relates to, we'll call it the overtime issue, the misuse of funds by Sergeant Forrest. When we did proceed to a hearing, we held 2 votes, to my recollection, one on each of those, as to whether that particular allegation would proceed. The vote was to proceed with both, and so as our deliberation today, we need to, I think, address each of those 2 allegations.
And I guess the minutes would reflect this. My memory is different from that. My recollection is that we voted to go forward with a hearing on the undue influence question, but that we wanted to wait until we received the auditor's response to make a decision of whether to go forward on the misuse of funds for overtime.
I'm actually holding the order that was
Okay.
signed by the chair.
Okay.
And I think his description's proper. I think it's the 2 matters, we had 2 votes, 2
Okay.
motions and 2 votes.
Okay, great.
But I think I recall as well that we said, as to the second, we'll wait to see what the auditor says. And perhaps we can just take a moment and consider the auditor's report.
Yes, I think that'd be a great idea.
Because I might have misread it or be misunderstanding its import. I thought that the auditor's report, if we look at it, and I think it was initially dated August 22, 2018, I believe there was a supplemental report that came through in September that we were provided with. I believe the supplemental, and so what I'm looking at now is the kind of cover letter of the auditor's report from the audit committee. And looking at, in that initial introduction, 3B, which is the enclosed report provides additional detail concerning, and our investigation concluded. So it's their conclusions. And 3B concludes that the allegations that then Mayor Megan Barry and Sergeant Robert Forrest pleas of conditional guilty to a theft over $10,000, that they do not comply with the Metro Nashville government's employee standard of conduct as delineated in our code, and that conclusion, that has been substantiated. So I was reading that as the auditor saying that a violation of the code was substantiated, but I don't know if I'm reading it properly.
That was my reading, and for clarification, if you read the remainder of that paragraph 3B, and
Right.
this is correct in my view, the auditor's finding of substantiated, which is the adjective he used, is not binding on this board. It's merely the auditor's opinion was that the evidence that there, a guilty plea for theft of $10,000 or more violated Code of Laws 2.222.
Right, but in that second sentence, it says, though, although the auditor's investigation concludes that the standards of conduct were violated, that finding was substantiated, I read the second sentence to say, but that final decision is, they will defer to the BEC, this board, because it's the responsibility of the appointing authority, elected officials, because the responsibility is for the Board of Ethical Conduct to make that final decision.
Yes.
So it's saying, we find that it was an ethical violation, but we are deferring to the BEC. That's how I read paragraph 3B.
Yeah.
And if legal counsel...
I think that's right.
Okay.
That's how I read it as well.
Okay. Which gets back to the comment just made about we had at that time said we would wait for the auditor's report as to that aspect of the case.
And not to get too in the weeds here, but my recollection of the sequence of events was initially we were going to have a bifurcated hearing. We were going to hold the hearing on undue influence prior to the auditor's report, and then when the auditor's report was received, we were going to set the hearing on the other issue. Ultimately, I think because of a FOIA request, or whatever the Tennessee analog is, that we ended up delaying the other hearing to a point where the auditor's report had already been released, and then we proceeded with today. But I do, we have testimony in the record today. We also have documents that were submitted in advance. And this board, in my reading of the ordinance, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, is we're an investigatory board. We're not a court of law, and we have a duty to investigate these things. So even though no one said, I hereby present as Exhibit A this auditor's report, and then itemized things in here through sworn testimony, I think that we have the right and maybe the obligation to consider this as part of the decisions that we make today. So maybe for a more orderly process, this first discussion can be in relation to we'll call it the overtime allegation, I think is the term we used at the last hearing, which is, the misuse of overtime and paid time by Mr. Forrest and by Mayor Barry. And in that regard, there was a guilty plea by each of them. Each of them has paid restitution on that.
And so the evidence toward that issue is both this audit plus their guilty pleas is primarily what we're considering right now.
I think so.
I think so too. Okay. And are we gonna vote on each, except for the overtime and the undue influence?
Yeah, unless anyone has contrary thoughts, I think that has the same, it's basically the same way that we voted when we moved from the Department of Law's report toward the hearing phase.
Okay.
And if there's no further discussion in relation to the overtime allocation, I would, have someone make a motion on that. I guess let's do this one thing before. This is a question that popped into my head, and I think in one of the Department of Law's reports this was addressed. Maybe it was just in a footnote. I don't remember. I couldn't find it when I was studying up for today. But Mayor Berry's no longer in office, and maybe just a layman's perception, but typically when a council censures someone, it happens while they're in office. She's not anymore. Is there precedent, I feel like you addressed this before, for a censure basically retroactively to an official that's already resigned?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where it is, but our reading was that nothing about the code would extinguish this board's ability to evaluate conduct simply because somebody had left. So in other words, you can recommend censure for someone who resigned.
Okay. And I tend to agree with basically the complainant's concession that of the 4 remedies that we can, or recommendations that we can possibly make, censure is the last man standing, as it were.
I think the other 3 have happened to some degree. Sure. And so I agree, and I think that because that's what they're asking for, that's what you can focus on.
Okay, all right. So with that said, and barring any further comments by board members, does someone want to make a motion with respect to that allegation?
And can I suggest something also along those same lines? It seems as though, and maybe this is what you were contemplating, but you vote on a finding as to a violation, and then a determination as to what, if anything, you're going to do. Right, so the vote doesn't necessarily, I would vote on, is this a violation? And then what are we going to do to address this violation? And maybe that's what you were contemplating anyway.
No, but
Instead of a formal motion,
yeah,
we
okay.
just say, yes, it's a violation, or no, it's not.
Okay.
Well, I'd say do it by motion,
Yeah.
but then not just combine, it's a violation and here's what the repercussions are.
Okay.
Although and another way to approach it would be, since there's 2 different discrete conducts in the sense that conduct that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Can we make a determination whether this conduct is a violation? Is this conduct a violation or not? And once we see what we have decided, then determine if either one or both are violations, then determine what we'll do.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a good approach.
Yeah. But I do agree with Keith's thought that just it gets awkward if you do it sort of in a Robert's Rules motion when you're voting yes or no on whether or not some conduct violated the rules. So I think we could hold it simply as, a vote yes or no by each board member as to whether Mayor Berry's conduct with respect to Sergeant Forrest's use of overtime constituted a violation of the standards of conduct. Did I articulate that adequately as far as what we're voting on? Does anyone disagree with how I phrased that?
So yes, she violated, or no, she did not
Yes.
violate?
Do we need to be specific as to which provision of the standards of conduct we're considering?
I think that would be prudent, yes. And I did go through that in preparation for today. I know that the Department of Law's, or Klein Bussel's report, enumerated 3 potentially violated subdivisions of the statute. It was G, H, and K, correct?
G, I, and K.
G, I, and K. Let me find my notes on that. Yes.
I would submit that we're here to address the complainant's allegations. And I think the proper question before the board is whether the complainant's allegations, based on the material evidence before the board, rises to a standard of the questions before you. In other words, it's not a vote of yes or no, it's a vote of does this evidence meet this amount of sufficient proof to have this violation. It's not our burden to secure a board member's no vote. This is whether there's sufficient material evidence before the board to make a finding of a violation of the ethical code. And so,
I'm just not thinking of this from a technical legal perspective enough, but I'm not seeing, it sounds like a distinction without a difference, because if we're determining that there was enough evidence, then we're determining that there was a violation. So a vote that simply says there was a violation based on a given scope of conduct should suffice in my view.
I think that with reference to the specific standard of conduct that we are considering, it will help to elucidate Mr. Garrison's question and concern. The question of material evidence asks the question, material evidence of what? I believe that Mr. Garrison was suggesting and asking us to consider whether we have material evidence that Mayor Barry took step A or B because of a influence. And I think that's why we need to really refer to the standards, which is our only guide. And if we look at, for instance, and I know we have I, J, and K, but if we look at K, a standard, a public official shall not give reasonable basis by their conduct for the impression that a person can improperly influence them, one, a person can unduly enjoy their favor, two, or that they will be unduly affected by that person or that person's influence. That's K, the standard that we are now applying to the evidence that we heard. So again, we do not have to decide what was in Mayor Barry's mind, what her subjective motivations were. Our task is to say, did she, by her conduct, create a reasonable basis to give the impression that she was favoring someone in their duties, or influenced or affected by a person? That's, I think, the question for us.
Okay, and you're speaking to the undue influence allegation right now.
Or the K also speaks to unduly enjoy their favor,
Okay.
which could be the excessive overtime.
All right. Yeah, with respect to the excessive overtime and the fact that it resulted in a guilty plea of theft, I gravitated toward G, which indicated that the public official, quote, shall not receive or use for personal purposes any property, services, or funds of the Metropolitan government unless authorized by law. Mm-hmm. Definitionally, theft is not authorized by law. Are there any further thoughts or comments? Otherwise, I'm inclined to call a vote on whether Mayor Barry's conduct with respect to Sergeant Forrest's overtime violated Section 2.222020 subdivision G, which I just described, which is part of the standards of conduct.
Sure. It's my understanding that that payment that he received from that was not authorized by her, was authorized by someone else?
Requested by her, authorized by someone else,
Mm-hmm.
but still requested by her.
I'm not certain of who did the request.
Well, what I'm saying is, I don't think she is the one that authorized that pay for him.
When he submitted the request.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, and my thought process was in part that she participated in the activity where he was doing other things while on the clock, and also that she pleaded guilty to theft surrounding that conduct.
I mean, I don't read G as requiring her to have actually authorized it. I read it broader than that.
But is my colleague raising the question of the applicability of G because it speaks to Sergeant Foster's funds, not Mayor Barry's misuse of her own funds? They both,
Sure.
I think that might be a confusion.
Okay. Well, and I is another one that was discussed in the legal report, which indicates that a public official shall not use their metropolitan government positions improperly to secure unwarranted privilege or exemptions for themselves, relatives, or others, and then it goes on to qualify it. And I think that as well this category of conduct could fall into that subdivision. Any other thoughts on that?
But it's my view that either I or K, again, I'll go back to K.
And K again with respect to the overtime.
Yes.
Well, I would propose that someone phrase how you want to take this vote. I don't know that we need to vote separately on each subdivision of section 2.222. Any thoughts there? And I'm re-reviewing these.
So I'm here, we're sticking with G with your initial motion, I guess.
G, yeah, and I'll withdraw that request for vote, because we've had further discussion, and I don't want the waters to get too muddied here before we actually have the vote.
I would suggest voting on the individual subsections so that if there's a review, the court knows what it's reviewing.
Where it's pointing toward?
Yes.
Okay.
What we're looking for material evidence of.
I'm fine with that. Okay, so we're discussing only the overtime allegation right now, not the undue influence, which was the lion's share of the testimony right now. And we're going to vote on each of G, I, and K separately as to whether that conduct, his use of overtime and her involvement in that violated the particular section. So first we'll hold a vote on whether the conduct surrounding the overtime allegations violated subdivision G of the standards of conduct.
Yes, for violation.
Again, I'm looking at the order that we issued.
Yep.
You signed.
Okay.
Where we took the vote, we were going to be considering whether the complaint as far as it alleged that, and here's the way we described
The actual
conduct.
description.
Yes, which
If you
was-
want to
Yes.
you want to propose the vote, and I don't have that document in front of me,
Okay.
but I think we should track with that language so that the
Okay.
record is neat and easier to understand looking backward.
Do we find that Mayor Barry's relationship with Sergeant Forrest creates an appearance of giving preferential treatment due to payment of excessive amounts of overtime in violation of the standards of conduct, subparagraph
We'll start with G.
G?
And I think we should do an actual roll vote here, or we can go down the line on that.
Do you want Ms. Woods to talk?
I'll start with respect to G. I'm not comfortable with exactly with the language, so my vote would be no on G.
Which end are we starting on?
My vote would be no on
Okay.
G as well. I don't think it's applicable.
Mine would be no on G two.
Somebody's wondering, I don't vote.
Right. Mine would be yes on G.
You voted.
I voted no on G.
And let me just say, as we go through each of these, the fact that Mayor Barry pled guilty keeps coming up, and I just want to say that people plead guilty for different reasons. That's not a factor in my decision. The auditor's report is, but as to G, I say yes.
Okay. And you've got those all recorded, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay. That particular vote did not carry.
Correct.
Okay. The next vote will be on the same conduct with respect to subdivision I of that provision.
I just need 1 minute to
Yep.
read.
Are we voting?
We are, and we're gonna, just to keep this orderly, we'll start with Diane. This actual vote, or the provision? Yeah, I'll read it. So subdivision I of that section says that employees, quote, shall not use their metropolitan government positions improperly to secure unwarranted privileges or exemptions for themselves, relatives, or others, provided, however, that this provision does not preclude employees from acting in a manner consistent with their official duties or from zealously providing public services to anyone who is entitled to them.
And the question, so the question that we're answering now is, did Mayor Barry's relationship with Sergeant Forrest create the appearance of giving preferential treatment due to payment of excess amounts of overtime in violation of that standard?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. I say yes.
I say yes.
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 No.
Motion passes.
All right, and that did pass, Elizabeth just noted. Same question, and now with respect to subdivision K, which indicates that an employee shall not give reasonable basis by their conduct for the impression that any person can improperly influence or unduly enjoy their favor in the performance of their official duties, or that they are unduly affected by the kinship, rank, position, or influence of any person.
So are you, start with Diane?
Yeah, we're gonna start with you, Diane.
Let's start that down that.
Okay.
end.
We're gonna start with you instead, I guess.
With me?
At Diane's request,
Okay,
yes.
so as the subpart K, I say yes.
I say yes as to subpart K.
Yes.
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 Okay, that motion carries as well. Now, I have not strayed from the 3 subdivisions that were discussed in the legal report, but I know of no reason why if a member of the board wishes to look at some other subsection here, we couldn't do that. Hearing no one, I think we should move on at this point to discussion of what we've called the undue influence allegation. Diane, could you start by reading the paragraph in our order that addresses that and what we're going to consider?
The allegation was that Mayor Barry's relationship with Sergeant Forrest, coupled with Mayor Barry's action or inaction on the MNPD business and police policy, violated standards of conduct.
And Kevin, with respect to that question, Am I correct that your firm's analysis also focused on those 3 subdivisions?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
and no others?
Didn't focus on anything.
Okay.
Beyond that.
All right, so on that question, I'll open it up for any discussion that anyone wants to have. We haven't yet really drilled down into the testimony that was presented today on that issue, and so the floor is open. I will say personally that while I am very appreciative of the testimony today, and I think there were some serious concerns raised, I'm having a little bit of trouble connecting the dots within the language of the way that this particular ordinance is drafted. Okay, well, if there's no further, go ahead.
I guess I do think that, for instance, both Ms. Lee's testimony that for the entire 2017, they were trying to figure out kind of what was going on with the mayor with respect to policing that. And then we had I thought we had some very direct testimony from Mr. Hayes that in a public setting, there was, he was a recipient witness to hearing someone who stated, a pastor state, a perception, an impression that there was something that, what does the chief of police have on you? And I think that in light of the, what is before us, that I think the thing here is the standard. Again, we do not have to, we are not saying anything about what Mayor Barry knew, understood, or why she did what she did. We can't speak to that, and there I would agree with Mr. Garrison. We don't have material evidence as to why the mayor took any particular action. We don't. I think we do have sufficient evidence to say that in the totality of circumstances, given what we have heard, that there is a reasonable basis for an impression that the mayor was influenced or unduly affected by her relationship. And I think the basis of it, I mean, the mayor, again, was taking certain steps and through her conduct, which she wished to keep undisclosed, which required that she keep it undisclosed because of the high stakes consequences of disclosure, as we've seen. I think it forms a reasonable basis for the impression that she may have been restricted in what she could do or who she would censure internally or piss off, and I think we are not saying that we know, again, subjectively, what was in her heart and mind and her thoughts. But we can say that given everything we do know, that I believe there is sufficient evidence for a violation of K, that it was a reasonable basis for the impression that someone could unduly influence her. Sergeant Foster or any other number of people who might have been exposed to something that she did and understood that there was an undisclosed relationship, which would create leverage.
And I just want to piggyback on that Dr. Franklin and Mr. Hayes' testimony spoke to their impressions, spoke to what they believed was happening, and I think sort of was the basis for even the initial complaint by Ms. Murphy, that there was an impression there. And the testimony kind of confirmed, meetings that were had, conversations that were had that led to that, and that it did not come from, just speculation, but that there were meetings that were had, conversations that were had that led to that impression, that any person can improperly influence or unduly enjoy their favorite in subsection K.
So, let me say, first, I joined the chair in thanking those of you who testified today. It is eye-opening as to some of the very serious issues that our city faces, and I do appreciate you bringing those forward and the energy and sincere belief that you bring with it. With that said, with all due respect to my colleagues, I think that we're making a significant leap in logic to get from Mayor Berry opposed the Community Oversight Board, as did Mayor Briley, and that somehow that's connected to her affair with Officer Forrest. I think that there are several leaps because it requires a reasonable basis by their conduct. And in my view, I mean, we all disagree with what Mayor Berry did, and we all think that it's bad. And I'm very happy for our city that she resigned and left. It was a blight on our city and one that hopefully will never be repeated. With that said, I did not hear sufficient testimony to get me from Mayor Berry opposed the Community Oversight Board to it was based on her relationship with Officer Forrest. And Diane, you obviously disagree with my views, so.
No. I don't, but I don't see that as the issue.
Well, I do.
Right, I'm just trying to understand that.
And I think the appearance provision, the way it's drafted, it has a reasonableness qualifier. So it's subjective to a certain extent, but it's not whether the conduct could create an appearance in some universe. It's whether a reasonable person would think that it did. And that was where my comment, and again, I do thank everyone that testified and the arguments, but I'm having trouble connecting the dots there.
And I think, because you mentioned that Mayor Briley also opposed the Community Oversight Board, but if Mayor Briley had also had an affair with his bodyguard, then the same question would come up again, right? But he didn't. And so then we could all agree that there were just political differences, and that was just what it was, which it could have been with Mayor Berry, except that she did have the affair with Robert Forrest. And so now we have to guess or wonder and, kind of infer from that behavior, those actions, that there was some type of undue influence.
Well, and again, I think that going down that path, what we would be doing is finding that a violation based on the fact that she had an affair. And that's not the question. The question is, did that affair somehow unduly influence her policy? And did people have that impression? I understand the distinction.
And if I may, from the testimonies that I've heard today too, I really appreciate them coming forward with the testimony that they had. But I'm just one of these types that, I can't sit here honestly and say that the testimonies that I heard today connect the dots with me, that she had influence on that. I can't sit there and say that. I didn't see no proof today, from my standpoint, to admit that she did. So that's where I'm gonna stand at right there.
All right, well, I think the way to proceed here then, because we've had a bit of discussion intervening, Diane, could you reread the question,
Yes.
and then we'll go through each subdivision here?
Okay. So, did Mayor Barry's relationship with Sergeant Forrest, coupled with Mayor Barry's action or inaction on MNPD's business and police policy, violate the standards of conduct?
Yes, and then we're going to drill down now into the three specific standards that we've been considering. The first is
Josiah, it occurs to me, I look back at the initial report and in the subsection analyzing what we're talking about here, We only put it in the context of K because the other two didn't seem to fit.
And
So-
yeah, I would agree with
So-
that. Unless any other board members have any objections, we could just vote on K with respect to this particular scope of allegation. Okay, and that subsection says, an employee shall not give reasonable basis by their conduct for the impression that any person can improperly influence or unduly enjoy their favor in the performance of their official duties, or that they are unduly affected by the kinship, rank, position, or influence of any person. And so I'll call it to a yes or no vote. Do you want to begin?
No.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay. That motion did not carry. Unless anyone wants to raise any additional subdivisions here, I think that the next segment in our process here is to vote with respect to each, whether we recommend censure. And before we get to that, Kevin, there was something raised, I think it was near the beginning of the hearing today, that pointed out what appears to be mandatory language in our ordinance that says if we found a violation of the standards of conduct, then we, quote, shall provide any available or one of the available recommendations. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Yes. The specific language is, if after a hearing, the board decides that a metropolitan government elected official or member of a board or commission violated the standards of conduct or current executive order which regulates the ethical standards of conduct, then the board shall take one or more of the following actions as decided by affirmative vote of at least 4 of its members.
Okay.
And what I would say to piggyback off of that is your options have been narrowed to 1, basically, but I don't think that this means that you necessarily have to vote yes on the 1, because let's say what you would have chosen was refer it to the DA, or you would have chosen something else. That's already happened. It doesn't mean that you now have to censure because of a violation.
So to
It's just the options are fewer.
Just to regurgitate so I can make sure I understand what you're saying then, even though we have to select one of the remedies, if the remedy that we would have selected is now moot, and then we don't necessarily have to vote yes on the only remaining remedy. So
Yes.
theoretically, even though we found a standard violation, there's no recommendation here
You
for
could
the
say
board?
it's already been, what we would have done has already happened.
Okay. So, I guess we'll have, there were, was it 2 of the subdivisions that we determined constituted a violation?
I and K.
I and K. So with respect to the violation of I, I'm going to call a yes or no vote on whether to recommend censure. And I will start with
Can we
Diane.
have discussion on the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, because I want to make a statement. I just want to say on this question, I take to heart and appreciate, again, Mr. Garrison's point about the city needing to move on. And I actually think it's likely something that everyone in this room agrees with, that cares and loves the city. And we need to move on, and I think the only place where I disagree with Mr. Garrison is whether moving on, what moving on means, and I think that there are multiple ways to move on. So that is why I will be voting for censure, because I think there's an argument that with censure, a recommendation from this board, it also allows the city ultimately to move beyond this and to move forward. So, a little preamble to my vote.
Okay, anyone else have any commentary on the censure issue and our vote on it before we hold the vote?
I want to acknowledge the statement that was made by Ms. Murphy, that it's important for the entities that make decisions about legal and ethical issues to send a message that it's not okay to commit a felony or to do things that are unethical. So I think it's important that this board has looked at this carefully and has made these decisions, and that whatever we do, I think hopefully will send a further message. I think a lot of messages have been sent already that you can't do that in Nashville and not have consequences. And so I hope that all the effort and emotion that has gone into testifying here is reflected in, I think, the importance of acknowledging that it is important to make a statement that it's not okay to do things that are unethical, and that people in Nashville can't do that and nothing happens.
I very much agree, and, you know, this board was formed in part so that those ethical issues are given an in-depth look, and because they've got the, you know, sort of complaint structure, it encourages concerned citizens to come forward. This time is not free. People put a lot of time into this, and I think that that's a good thing. And I too agree. You know, there was some commentary about the Metro Council has not censured Mayor Barry, but I'm not, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm not sure that there was ever a resolution presented to do so that was voted down. I think that our board's recommendation to do so could be a good thing and send the right message about that Nashville cares about ethics and adhering to rules for its public officials. Okay, any other commentary? Otherwise, I'll move forward with a vote on whether or not to recommend censure.
I'll start.
Okay.
I vote to recommend censure.
I vote to recommend censure.
Yes, to recommend censure.
I vote to recommend censure.
I vote yes as well.
And we're going to actually have two votes because we determined there were two separate Violations of the code. Is that correct, Kevin, or can we have one vote? I maybe should have asked that question before.
I think you can have one vote.
Yeah, okay, all right, well, that simplifies it
Yeah.
then. Okay, all right. Let me look back at our agenda and make sure I'm not missing anything. I believe that concludes the hearing itself. I know that we've all said this, but we very much appreciate everyone's time and effort in bringing these issues to the board's attention. It's like I said, it's not free for anyone, and I know we all on the board, I don't think I speak for myself only, we appreciate the opportunity to be able to look at these issues and help Nashville keep its public officials accountable. Thank you very much, everyone. We have one more item on the agenda, and it's just a calendaring issue, basically, correct, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay, and it relates to another complaint that was filed. But before we finalize, Kevin, it might be good for us to have this brief discussion while everyone's here, but I believe that we issue a written order, is that correct?
That's correct.
Following this date, and it'll be served on the parties?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it'll be served on the parties. I prepare the draft order.
Yeah, and then I, as chairman, sign it. We gave, prior to the hearing, Elizabeth provided the notice of appeal rights, which set forth that, you know, whether or not there's a right to appeal. And so this is all just to say there will be a written order memorializing these findings. It'll be provided to the parties in the near future. I would anticipate it might be in the beginning of January at this point. Yeah,
Yes.
given the holiday. Thank you very much.
Do you need a vote to adjourn?
No, we still have to do this meeting, city meeting.
Okay. This, I'm not, I believe that my term technically ends on December 31, so it'll be up to,
Actually, under the charter, every person who's appointed to a board of commissioners can serve for 60 days after their expiration.
Okay. Just
So
until
I
there's
just need to get
an
with the national
appointment.
bar. I just
Yeah.
wanted to, you know, I was hoping that
Yeah.
this hearing could be completed before I had that conversation with the National Bar Association.
Yeah.
Or you, and so we can discuss
And I-
that privately regarding
Just do it
your, exactly. I'm not assuming anything, but I don't.
No, I would
don't-
totally stay on if the appointment's available. You know, I know Erin Paul and Polly. Well, I guess by January she wouldn't be making the appointment anymore, but,
We're still in a meeting. No,
yeah.
no, so.
Yeah, anyway, we don't need to discuss that right now. But I just
Well, we
wanted
do need
everyone to
to
know that there's a
discuss it,
potential
yeah,
that the
right
next
away.
time we meet, it could be someone other than me here at the board,
Okay.
so.
We'll make them chair.
Okay.
All right, so what are we looking at for a date?
Third week in January? Or, it's available. All right, I'll go through the list first.
Diane?
Yeah, we're
Hey,
not
Diane.
adjourned, y'all know
We're
that, right?
We're trying to
still,
get a date set.
So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, y'all talking to us?
Yeah.
we're still in the meeting.
Oh, you did? Oh, that's okay. Well, I guess,
Pick a date and I'll.
Okay,
confirm.
yeah, so I
Okay.
just wanted to let y'all know that I
and if we
did,
need to continue it, that's fine.
offer both parties the opportunity to let me know if they had any upcoming conflicts in January, and I didn't hear, I mean, they both confirmed
Okay.
receipt of that request, but neither one of them expressed that they had any conflicts. I've talked to the Department of Law because actually Kevin's schedule isn't relevant for this next one, and I have their calendar as well. And then, of course, our council calendar is relevant. So the first date that I have available would be January 4th.
I'll be out of town.
I'll be out.
Okay, the 8th,
No.
the 10th,
That works.
That's fine for me.
good, okay. The times available are from 10 to noon, 10 to 1, so we'll just say 10 o'clock.
Okay.
That's fine. And Ms. Allen does not have her calendar, so maybe just
Okay.
get with.
Nothing comes to mind, so I'll
Okay,
confirm.
get with Elizabeth if there is anything that's there.
And we'll be back over.
Yes, regular location.
Unless you got some friends you want to bring with you to that.
No.
Okay.
Can I take a moment to say congratulations to Mariah? Who's getting married this weekend. It's very exciting.
Come up. Yeah.
That's very exciting.
Did you take the step
Thank
through
you.
it, or do I need to take it?
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
you leave it and. Oh, yeah, no problem at all.
All right, let's make a motion.
Yeah, we need to
Oh,
move to
adjourn,
adjourn. I'll
yes.
move to adjourn. Anyone second? All in favor? Aye. Okay.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.